Okay, so here we are in the Fast and Furious composition. Now this spot was created using Maxon Cinema 4D and Adobe Illustrator and Adobe After Effects. And I'm just going to walk through, this is basically just one composition. I've turned all the layers off. I'm going to walk through it step by step by turning on layers in the composition. Now the idea for this came from the trailer. This was for Foxtel box office here in Australia. And a lot of the ideas for these come from the trailer. But I generally don't like to copy the trailer exactly. What I like to do is look at the trailer and see if I can, enhance it, maybe make it better. And this trailer, had a nice little sort of thing where the text sort of flies in as individual letters, and there's an impact, boom, and then they're kind of rotating slightly, and there's sort of this vertical blur and sort of lighting effect that sort of moves across the text. It's not bad at all. But I decided to use some of these, especially the things like the brush metal, and take this a little bit further. So what I had to do first was create the text, because we had a lot of different supers. We had about 12 different supers for this, and I had to create all the text first and then take that across to Cinema 4D. And also had a bunch of pack shots, of course. We're looking at a pack shot here. I'll show you some of the supers in a moment. So first thing I did was go on the internet and try and find the font. And luckily I was able to find this font as a free font, and it's a very good font actually. It's called Incised 901 Nord Italic, and you can see here I am in Illustrator, and I basically just set the text up with a similar style to the trailer, just by typing it in, selecting the first letter and scaling that up, and then just by playing with the line spacing of these first letters. So once that was done, the text was typed in, then I just converted it to outlines, because of course programs like Cinema 4D need paths. Let's just view these as outlines. So there's my paths. Now what I also had to do once I'd prepared this text was to recreate this logo, the Daytona 500 Experience logo. And my first challenge was to actually find the logo. Amazingly, what I was able to do was find this huge Daytona logo on the internet. And I've set this up as a guide layer in Illustrator. If I just double click that layer, you can see I've just chosen to dim the image to 50%, and you can also lock it and put that on the layer below. And on top of that, I've created paths. Okay, it took me probably an hour to do that. Just recreate that in Illustrator as individual paths. One thing I did do was make it better. You can see here, have a look at this. Look at that. I don't know, I hope the guy who did this isn't watching, but that's pretty dodgy. It's a bit messy. There's big holes in it. There's a few problems with this logo. So I decided I couldn't recreate it like that. So I had to, just fix those areas. You can see I just cleaned those up. Okay? So keep an eye out for those kind of things. All right, so that's the Daytona paths and an example of the paths I used for the text. Next, what I did was come across to Cinema 4D and create the 3D objects. Now, Cinema 4D is my weapon of choice when it comes to 3D and After Effects. I'm also a big fan of the Zaxworks plugins, depending on the job at hand. But Cinema 4D really is the killer 3D application because of the way it works with After Effects. I'm not going to show you how I set this text up to any degree. All I'm going to show you is that I imported my splines. So there's my spline. There's plenty of great tutorials out there on how to do this, including making it look great 6 right on Motionworks. And you can see I've animated the splines. I've also applied an extrude NURBS to that, and that gives me the extruded text. And I've used MoGraph, because remember in the trailer that I just showed you, the text was all broken up and then it sort of flew in. It flew into the center and formed the words. So I recreated that by using a MoGraph fracture object. Choosing the MoGraph fracture object. Let's turn that on. You can see how I've broken that up. And to the fracture object, I applied a random effector. So that just moves the text out at random once the fracture object's applied. So, and animated those, back to 0 so that the text reforms. It was pretty simple. Okay, so let's just take a look at the rendered version. You can see I've applied a nice brush metal to the text. I've taken the text look a little bit further. I've used a kind of a gold color on the sides and a nice little bevel there. For my environment, I've used a sky object, and on the sky object I've used a nice black and white texture to reflect specifically in the bevels. It really makes the bevels punch out. You can see how we get this nice little punchy reflections in the bevels. Just zoom in here. Nice little punchy reflections in the bevels and on the sides there. So yeah, it's a nice look. I mean, texturing and materials take a lot of work, and a little bit of practice, and you can come up with some pretty nice looks. The thing is knowing when to stop, though. You can play with the textures for hours, days, weeks. All right, so the other thing I did use in here was a great tool by Chris Smith. Now, Chris Smith created a bunch of different tools called CS tools, Chris Smith tools, that make a lot of these techniques in Cinema 4D very fast. Now, the great news is that these have been bundled with Cinema 4D 11.5. I'm only using version 10, so I had to download these. But one of these tools I use is called DocuCam. And DocuCam basically is a camera object, but it has a whole bunch of little user data that Chris has set up that allow me to control the camera. And the key for this particular camera is this organic motion. This gives me this kind of shake, and it's all set up in the camera. All I had to do was set keyframes for amplitude, and a higher value gives me a lot of shake. A lower value gives me almost no shake. So what I did was I had quite a high value amplitude when the text hits. So it goes boom and kind of shakes around. The camera shakes, but then the keyframe, you can see the keyframes here. It's keyframe basically down to 0. So, or just I think it's probably not 0. Let's see. It's a very low value. Let's have a look. Yeah, 0.4. So we just get a very slight shake. I noticed in the trailer when I had a look at it on the final logo result that the actual logo itself just gently shakes, almost like it's idling, like like an engine is idling. And I like that, so I decided just to give it a little bit of shake, so it just feels like the text is like an idling engine, given the nature of the content of this. Okay, so once that was done, this was basically rendered out of Cinema 4D. And one of the key things to remember is that if I go to the render settings, Cinema 4D can export a project file, a compositing project file, for After Effects and for a whole bunch of other applications, but After Effects allows you to import the 3D data. So what I did was basically save the project, render it, choose this option, and come back to After Effects and import that. This is what it looks like when you import it. Let's just bring in one of those as an example. You can see it says fastandfurious.aec, After Effects composition. All right, so you see there's a new folder in my project panel and a new composition, and there's my Fast and Furious rendered footage. It's got an alpha channel, and look inside the composition. Check this out. Here's my Fast and Furious layer. Here's all of my lights from Cinema 4D. They're now After Effects lights. You can see them all here in the timeline. There's one there. In the comp, you can see them all in the comp. And there's my DocuCam with all of my keyframes. Okay, point of interest, position, orientation, zoom. So any sort of After Effects layer I drop in this composition now will be viewed by the same camera and by the same lights, which is very special. Let's take a look at what that means by going back to the other composition. Alright, so there's my DocuCam and here's my footage. Now you might have noticed that there was no motion blur on this. I didn't have time to use motion blur. It would have taken a long time to render. This was a very quick job, and I decided to put the motion blur on afterwards, and I did that in After Effects using the time warp effect. Just open up this comp. So there are third-party plugins for adding motion blur, things like Real Smart Motion Blur from Revision Effects, but After Effects has a great feature, which is the time warp effect. If I just turn that on, And you can see it's quite slow, but look at that. It's actually added motion blur to the render, which is amazing. You apply time warp from the time menu, time warp. And you can see I had it turned off because it's very slow. But isn't that exciting that you can actually apply motion blur after you've rendered? Why would you bother doing that in Cinema 4D or your other 3D program when you can add it afterwards? And what did I do next? Well, what I decided to do, remember when we saw the trailer, it had this kind of vertical streaks, this vertical motion blur or vertical fast blur. And that kind of look is a little bit cheesy. I didn't like that. So I decided to add a few explosions. And you might think these are cheesy as well, but I thought this was good and the client really liked this. So these effects are from the Video Copilot Action Essentials 2 set of stock footage. If you don't know about Video Copilot, I suggest you go and check out the website, probably the most popular website in motion graphics. And the Action Essentials 2 series is just an amazing series of action stock footage for a very reasonable price. We use it at Foxtel, and I've used some of the excellent sparks from there. You can see that explosion there. Let's just turn a couple of these on. So you can see when the text hits, when it finishes forming and it hits, boom, out comes some sparks. And I've just dropped the footage on top and used the add blend mode. It's pre-keyed footage, so it has an alpha channel, but using the add blend mode just makes it look a bit brighter when it's over the text. Just make that normal. You can see how it's kind of flat. You can't see through it. So even though it's keyed, it doesn't matter. It's better to use something like add or screen just to brighten it up a little bit. And a couple of other layers. And notice I haven't just used one. I've used a lot of them. I've used, in this case, 5 different layers just to get the look that I wanted. Let's take a look at that. Boom. Okay. There's a frame before and frame after. So by layering up these different pieces of stock footage, I've got those nice sparks, but I've added these cork hits, and it just gives a more sort of individual feel. A couple of other different sparks. Really nice. And you can see some of this debris kind of falling down. These shots are really nice because they have this sort of long debris field that just drops out of the air. Just adds a little more impact, a little more interest. Okay, so that was cool, but I wanted to integrate those hits and firecrackers a little bit better. So what I did was I applied some effects to the text. Let me just solo the effects. I wanted to make it look like the text was kind of red hot. There was an explosion and the text was, it's metal, so it kind of retains some of that heat. So to do that, what I did was I used the colorama effect. Just make sure my colorama is, I've keyframed colorama. We'll just come in and do these one by one. So when the text hits on the next frame, see it all goes orange? Let's just solo this. So the text has actually had colorama applied, and I've just used the excellent fire setting in colorama. Just the fire preset. Just here. And it would look silly to have the entire text go orange, so I isolated that colorama effect using a couple of other effects. So the next thing I used was the circle effect. And if we just turn the circle effect on by itself, you can see what I'm doing here. I've set it to stencil alpha. If we just turn that to normal, that's the circle effect. It's a big soft circle. I've used a big feather. And by using stencil alpha setting in here, basically I can use it as a mask to control where the effects that are above it are applied. Let's just make this much smaller. See that? That's controlling where that effect is applied. Just like that. If I wanted to use masks to control where the colorama effect was applied, I'd have to duplicate this layer, have one layer with colorama, and then the layer on top without colorama, and the layer below without colorama, and then mask the top layer, which is not a good workflow. Whenever possible, you should try and create your looks from as few layers as possible and use stacks of effects like I have here. Now, behind that text is another version of the text, and I've applied that using CC Composite. So CC Composite allows you to composite the original text below all of the other text, or behind in this case, or use different blend modes, or even put it on top. So by having all of these effects together, I get this hotspot. And then of course I've actually animated the colorama to sort of fade out, just like that. And I've used the curves effect just to brighten up the text a little bit and make it a bit more blue. So the result of that is this. So you get this little explosion, you get this nice sort of red sort of fall off of heat, and it just very quickly just fades out like that. Just adds something special to it, I think. Alright, so that's the text. That's the stock footage. Next, what I had to do was add some key art. Now, key art is what the client supplies. This is generally just art from the posters from the film. You can see it's pretty huge, and it's also portrait. I've got some masks on here. Let me just turn the masks off by choosing None from the View menu. That's the original poster. It's not very useful for me because it's in portrait, and I could never fit everybody into the picture, so I decided to sort of mask the two main characters out and mask the car out as well. We just turn those on. There's the dudes, and here's the car, a separate layer. Because I've made both of these layers 3D, and I've just brought the car layer slightly in front so that these guys can sit behind. Just by switching on their 3D switches and just staggered them slightly in 3D space so these guys can sit behind. Notice down here though that you can see some of the text from the poster. To cover that I used a shape layer, and that's filled with black, so if I just turn that on, it just covers that up. You can see that, just covering up that. Okay, so next thing was I thought, well, if we're going to get this sort of explosion and the text is going to be made, kind of red hot as the explosion happens, why don't we have some sort of red fall off on the background layers, on this key art? So I used the colorama effect again, and I've created an adjustment layer for that. And by giving it a nice soft mask, you'll see that I've just added a little bit of that same colorama effect to the layers in the background. So as we have the explosion, it goes kind of red and then just fades at the same speed that the heat fades from the text. So just a nice little way to integrate that stock footage, make it feel a little more as if it's part of the scene. Notice also that that everything's bouncing around as I move through frame by frame. That's because we're using the Cinema 4D camera. Remember, in Cinema 4D we have this setting where we can have the organic movement. And because I'm using the same camera that I've used for the text, it's getting the same movement. So it's very easy to get these images to feel as if they were part of the scene, because it's being viewed by the same camera, which is bouncing around. Once again, very, very easy to do. I just drop the footage in and it's automatically animated. Saves a lot of time. Okay, so we're almost there. The only other things I had to do was apply some text to it to tell people what time or what date and time actually in this case, to tell people what date the movie became available, and that basically just slides in. You can see actually there's a slight mistake here. On the left you can still see the text on the left and the right. You can see it before it slides in. So what I would have to do is actually just slide that text just back a little bit. Just there. See it? You can see it on the other side as well. I have to play around with that. But here to do that I've just used a text animator. So I haven't used two two layers for the text. I've used one layer, but I've used two animator properties, or two animator groups for position. And you can see it says position, position. So I've used my text range selector to select the top line, and I've duplicated it, and I've used another range selector to select the bottom line, and just animating that text in like that. We don't have time to cover that sort of animation in this now, but the text animator in After Effects is quite powerful. And once again, trying to use as few layers as possible to do this. Whatever I can do in one layer, I'll do it in one layer rather than creating multiple layers. Okay, and the last couple of things were the client's logos, just dropping in the logos. Once again, 3D layers, and here's one here. Let's just solo these. And just apply another couple of Action Essentials 2 explosions. So there's the first logo. This is a standard definition. And when that one's finished, we just do a little explosion. Boom. Okay, blow up the client's logo. And the other one just slides in 3D. Just the position's been animated in Z space. Boom, like that. So that's the result. Pretty simple. But client was very, very happy. I've got a bunch of other examples. Let me see if I can find some other examples of the supers that were done. Let's just hide this. Because as I mentioned earlier, I did about 12 or 13 of these. And you can see like Feel the Need. Here it is here. Okay, slightly different sparks for that one. And this is one of the cool things I like about doing motion graphics. Sometimes things happen, you don't expect them. See how this little spark just stays here from the stock footage and then sort of like pop, just pops out. It feels like I planned that, but I didn't plan that at all. It just works so perfectly. And another one here, the Need for Speed. Like that, a little bit different again. Trying to keep them all a little bit different. You can see how the text has been laid out in Illustrator. And of course, the Daytona logo. So once again, I created this logo in Illustrator using Pars from the JPEG that I found on the internet, and just laid this all out in Cinema 4D. Just a little camera move on it. So I turned a pretty crappy JPEG into a pretty nice looking logo. And look at the background. This is another Action Essentials layer. I wanted to put something behind this text, but I wasn't sure what. But I just thought this spark looked really nice because the sparks kind of hit the floor. And I really just dropped that in there. After I'd done the project, though, when I was preparing it for the presentation, I thought of how I could have made that look a little bit better. And that was by putting another version of the welding drops on top. Have a look at this. Here's the welding drops as a background. Here's the logo on top, which looks kind of good. But by adding another version on top of that and just offsetting it slightly in time, see, I've just slightly offset it so it doesn't look exactly the same as the background. You get a feeling that the logo is more integrated into the scene. And it's really nice because some of these sparks, once again, they hit what looks to be the logo and kind of bounce off, which is the same as that other spark before, kind of an accident and unexpected, but it's just a really nice way of integrating it into the scene. And looking nice. Okay, so that's Fast and Furious. It was a pretty fast job. Our client was very happy. Let's take a look at the finished pack shot again.